Hi, welcome to this fundamental series video on horizontal and vertical boxes in Nytril. The basic concept is pretty easy to understand. The horizontal box, or HBox, lays its contents out horizontally, whereas the vertical box, or VBox, lays its contents out vertically. Of course, when we refer to contents, we're really referring to elements that are in the revisions of the respective box. Even though the base purpose is simple, there are still some meaningful bits to understand that can make life easier when adding these formatters to your document. Okay, so let's take a look at our setup here. We have some variables that we've pre-declared for use in this discussion. We've also created a number of HBoxes, and we've created a number of VBoxes that we're going to discuss throughout. We've also have this sized text here that we'll discuss when we get to it in the discussion. To start with, let's look at the boxes. So this is an HBox and this is a VBox. These are the topics of conversation today. So I'm going to press F1 on this just to have a look at the parameters. So an HBox takes a width, a height, and a border. And if we do the same thing on a VBox, press F1, we get a width, a height, and a border. So their parameters here are exactly the same. So for each of the boxes, the HBoxes and VBoxes, we're adding these box borders. So what we're doing here is simply making a 1 pixel border all the way around the box, and we're giving it an internal padding of 10 pixels. And we're doing the same for the VBoxes as we are for the HBoxes. The only difference here are these prod boxes, prod H and prod V, where they don't have any padding, so we just have a border. But each of them have this revision here that is simply creating a border radius and giving it a background color. We'll look at the rest of this during our discussion. So let's get into it. Let's get started here with our first topic, just a basic HBox. So I'm just going to paste in some code here that shows that we're using demo HBox, which is being defined here as an HBox without any size parameters. And of course it has the borders we talked about earlier. So we're going to press F5 and we have this basic box layout. And the point here to get is that when we don't set any size parameters, the box will auto size. That really is the simplest way to use an HBox or even a VBox. So let's now talk about a fixed width box or a box with fixed sizes. And you can see here that we have 2 images in here and everything fits fine. But if I add a 3rd image, it runs over the edge. So the point here is that when you have a fixed width box in either direction, and in this case horizontal, you need to deliberately size your elements to fit within the box. Otherwise, they're going to run over the edge. It's just that easy. So if you do want the content to run over the edge, there's always the option to use border clipping. You can set that to true and then it will cut the content off. But the important point to gather here is that when you place content in an HBox, you need to be intentional about the sizing so that the content fits. Otherwise, it will just simply run over when you're using a fixed size. And that matters particularly when we use text. So let's have a look. Okay. So now here's an HBox with an image followed by some text. So we're using this watch art image followed by this demo text. And the text is running over the side because this is an HBox and we are not deliberately or intentionally sizing this demo text. As you can see up here, it's just a string. When you place text in an HBox, it's important to remember that we need to be deliberate and intentional about sizing the width of the elements when they're being placed in an HBox. So we're going to do that by simply putting this text itself inside of an HBox. And then again inside of a paragraph. And then in the paragraph we can give it par alignment center. Now what I've done here is I took an HBox and I said just make yourself 70% of the size of the parent container, and then in there drop in a paragraph of content, and I'm centering the text inside the paragraph. And the point here is just to be deliberate about your placement of text in an HBox. Now, because we're going to use this concept again and again in this lesson, I've went ahead and pre-populated similar code up here into a variable called sized demo text. So we're going to put that here. And it's a little different because we made it slightly too big. So let's make that a little smaller. There we go. Each axis can also be automated. Well, we fix one and make the other auto. This is an example of having the vertical axis fixed and the horizontal axis as null, so it's auto. We're looking at this X size HBox. If we take a look at that, we can see the horizontal is null and the vertical is fixed. So let's go back, F5. And we can see that's what happened here. We fixed this vertically at 100 pixels, and it's smaller than the size of the content, so the content runs over. But horizontally, it pushed the box over. Let's take a look at doing the same thing with horizontal fixed and vertical being auto. So now we've fixed our width horizontally, so our content is too wide and it pushes over, but vertically it's sized to the content. So we can use null null, at which time we get this layout here where it just sizes the entire box, or we can size either axis. If we do make the box fixed as it's shown here, then we need to be deliberate about how we size our content so that it fits into the box. Okay, so enough on sizing. Let's talk about how to start actually working with the content that we put inside the box. So to start with, we're going to talk about horizontal alignment. That is HAlign, and it does what you would think. HAlign centers the content. I can use one of the other options, HAlign right, we'll put it at the right, etc. And as you can imagine, if there's an HAlign, there's also a VAlign. So here we have our vertical alignment. Nytril vertically aligned the content here, horizontally aligned the content there. You accomplish that using the property HAlign or the property VAlign. Now there's another formatting option called Justify that has similar type effect, except there's multiple options. And if you've used CSS Flex, then you've experienced this before. In this case, we're using space evenly, which is taking the two items here, the two elements, and it's spacing them evenly given the available space. Now it's important to point out that HAlign, VAlign, and the justifiers all require that the box have a specific size so that it knows where to center or justify the content. So let's press F1 here on Justify, and we can talk about that in a bit more detail. Here are the horizontal alignment options, and they lay out like this. This is an HBox laying out 3 items all in one box. When there is no justification, it's justified to the left here. Start justifies it to the left in an HBox and justifies it on the right, center in the middle, space between, space around, put space around each items with more emphasis on making the center spaces even and the outside spaces a little smaller, where space evenly is just even across the board. And then vertical spacing, similar except with the axis rotated. So center still puts it vertically in the center, not horizontally, and puts it at the bottom, start at the top, etc. So to align your content, you have the choice of using HAlign, VAlign, or one of the justifiers. Okay. So next we're going to talk about separators and separation. So here I've created a box, and this time I'm using this prod box that has slightly different formatting from the other ones. You can see we've got rounded corners and a background color, and I put some images in there. And we're going to talk about separators first. A separator is something that will be placed in between each element. So here we're using a separator and we're giving it a right arrow. So I'm going to press F5, and that's nice. So separation is a means of placing a certain amount of space in between each element. So here I'm saying add 10 pixels of space between each thing here. So we're going to press F5, and there we have it. Okay, so we've gone over a number of useful features with the HBox. So let's take a look at the same thing with a VBox. So I'm going to paste in a bunch of code here. And we're just going to press F5. And we've got a section next page here. So we're going to skip down to the next page. And now we're just going to walk through these concepts, but this time with the VBox. So for the basic box, we're looking at our content laid out vertically instead of horizontally. That's the difference, right? HBox horizontal, VBox vertical. Same thing when you fix the height of a VBox and you put content in it, it will flow over, or it may flow over depending on how large these items are. And just as with an HBox, you can use border clip, set it to true, and it will cut off the excess. Now, one of the big differences between a VBox and an HBox is the use of text. With an HBox, you need to be very specific and intentional about the sizing of the text. That's not true necessarily with the VBox. With the VBox, you can just put the text in straight and it will format itself within the boundaries because it's sizing itself all the way from side to side and there aren't other elements involved. And so just as with the HBox, the auto sizing for one axis and not the other works just the same as it does with a VBox, except things are stacking vertically. And the same is true for the alignment options. Center centers the content either horizontally or vertically. And then lastly, the separation separates vertically, adds space vertically, and the separator adds its items vertically. So in this case, we have a similar layout, except this time showing this downward progression. And just as I was closing this project out, I noticed that I left out the vertical version of the justifier. So I wanted to put that in and show you that space evenly does so on a vertical basis, just as we discussed. And also I needed to revise this VBox a little bit from what I showed at the beginning of the video. I set the horizontal axis to null and vertical, I set it to 400. So it would have a vertical distance on which to justify the content. So that's a pretty good discussion of HBoxes and VBoxes in Nytril. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us on our Discord server. You can find the link in the description box below. See you in the next video.